I was thinking about what to talk about today because it's we're quite a mixed set of people. There's people who've been sitting for a long time, many years, and there's people for whom this is their very first session. So it's I want to apologise in advance if I say things that seem obvious to the folk who know it really well, and if it's over the head of some other people, it could be as well. And if I say some things that don't seem relevant to you, they may not be, but they could also be so. So forgiveness for if it seems old hat or it seems too new, one way or the other. Okay. First of all, I'd say what Sesshin is about, and it's really hard to pin it down. I'm sure you've all had the same issue when somebody says to you, if you are involved in Zen, and you're at a dinner party or something, and they ask you what is Zen, and of course you're completely paralysed. You don't know what to say at all. What is Zen? So it's quite tricky to define it, but essentially it's the practice of seeing into your own authentic nature, and then you could immediately ask two questions. What is that? What is this authentic nature? And you could then ask, anyway, why would I bother wanting to see into it? So two questions can arise when we talk about the practice of seeing into one's own nature. And I can't talk about what it is, but we can talk later about how we might experience what it is. But I can say that one of the benefits of even a small insight into one's own nature, or true nature, or Buddha nature, or authentic self, is being manifested completely by the peacock, is that it gives us something that we can depend on in any circumstance, because it's always present. And that's really useful, you know. The older we get, I think it becomes more and more useful to feel that we have something that's always present. And one of the best ways in this tradition, pragmatically, that's being realised, to see into one's own nature is Sesshin. And it is challenging. Sesshin is always challenging. And you know, and if it wasn't, we probably wouldn't respond to it. But pragmatically, I do see that Sesshin and Zen practice does give us some strength to take care of the things that will come up in our lives. Touch wood when I say that, because you never know how you're going to be till it comes up. We may have confidence we are, but let's all be empathetic for people who have trouble. You really don't know how you're going to be till it comes up. But the way that the vehicle for this is Zazen, which is the practice that this tradition particularly focuses on. And paradoxically, given what I've just said, that seeing into our own nature gives us something to rely on, Zazen, in fact, is unfixed. And it isn't anywhere, the practice isn't anywhere where you can find somewhere to feel solid. In fact, practice gives us the opportunity to discover where we're stuck. And I think it's probably true to say that in some respect we're all stuck somewhere or other, and if we don't think we're stuck, that's where we're stuck. So it's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, but I think in practice it turns out to be the case. And I'll say more about it later. But the reason we get stuck, it's a moving feast. Sometimes we're more stuck than other times, and sometimes we're not stuck at all. We can move freely, and it changes with time, with age, with circumstance. But certainly the reasons we get stuck, and the reason the session is difficult, is that most of the time, most of us are in our behaviour and way we are in life is conditioned by our nature, our personality, our ego, whatever you want to call it. And we've all developed really good techniques to make sure our ego stays intact. And I'll say more later about what the Buddha realized about the ego. But we're all, to one degree or another, conditioned by that. And what we bring to life is often a pattern that recreates previous patterns and reflect what we've learned in the past to deal with particular circumstances, particularly in our childhood, which we then bring into operation at a later date when it's no longer relevant, because we're all grown-ups, aren't we? Although none of us ever feel like we've really grown up until we're about 70, and even then it's a question mark. But what happens in Zazen, and I'm just going to read out to you my own definition of Zazen, is that it gives us the opportunity to see those things in a non-judgmental way, and they will come up, they do arise. And the reason the Sesshin is difficult is, it's been described as a battle between big mind, or our authentic self, and small mind, which is our ego self. And ego self doesn't really want to be challenged. It doesn't really want to experience this spaciousness and openness that you could call the big mind space. It has a real trouble with that. And I'm sure even all of us here, 2 or 3 days before coming, we've all had doubts about whether we want to come. Is this what we want to do? Why are we doing this? Why would we do this? Why would we arbitrarily restrict ourselves? This arbitrary restriction is really interesting. And I'm sure all of us have had resistance, if not this time, to coming to something like this. And it's that part of ourselves that really doesn't want to face change, that has that resistance. Not that I'm not implying, and I will later talk about the fact that in one respect we're all absolutely fine as we are. So I'm not implying when I say you're resistant to change that you need to change. Sometimes you may feel that and sometimes you may not. As I say, this is a completely open system and there isn't any real fixed view on the way it should be. But let me just read you my definition, if you like, of what Zazen is about. I'll read it to you, then I won't mix it up. The heart of the Zen tradition is Zazen, a form of meditation. It is the practice of being what we are, of allowing, permitting, opening ourselves to ourselves. Our aspiration is to open the path to transformation, to becoming comfortable in who we are. We enter wholeheartedly into embracing our lives and cultivating the courage to live freely and creatively, and ultimately to manifesting compassion for all beings. So that's my sense of what Zazen's about. So that's really relevant when you're sitting, for folk that are quite new to the practice, that the thoughts will arise. Obviously, that's the function of the mind, is to think. So thoughts will naturally arise, and don't try to stop them, because you're already thinking. But you're going to create an extra level. I'm now thinking about stopping my thoughts. It's another thought. So we allow whatever comes up to come up, and we allow whatever emotions to come up, and that it's an absolutely safe space on the mat. And the only person that's going to judge what comes up is yourself. So, you can be your own judge and executioner, or you can allow what comes up to come up. And my suggestion is that, as the week proceeds, that things do normally arise for us, that one of the benefits of this practice and one of the difficulties of it is that things do arise that we thought, we're over and done with. But in fact, probably is still there in our system and probably still define in some ways how we are. Whatever comes up, just allow it to come up and feel it. You don't have to think why. You don't have to think, why am I angry, or why did this person act in this way, or why did I act that way, or anything that might come up. We just allow it to come up and we feel it. We don't have to judge it or find a solution to it or fix it. And we're not bad and we're not good. It's just what arises. So, Pemba Chodron, what's her first name? Pema Chodron. She says, and I really like it, she says, meditation is an invitation to notice when we reach our limit through meditation we're able to see clearly what's going on with our thoughts and emotions, and we can also let go of them. And I love it, she says, it's an invitation. It's not a compulsory requirement, it's an invitation to notice what comes up. And when we do, for some of us, we do see when we allow things to come up what it is that we avoid, and what we run and hide from, what we actually want to keep from penetrating our hearts, and what we all keep really busy at avoiding. And I think all of us, to some degree, all do that. You know, we all have displacement activities which are our favourite. You know, mine is sitting in Cafe Nero reading the Times. But everybody has their own avoidance tactics. But can I just really suggest that you open and relax? And, you know, it sounds a funny thing to do, relax, but if we relax into it, then our boundaries soften. So, this is for folk who, and there aren't many of us here, but there are several of us who haven't done Sesshin before, and I just want to kind of give you some warnings about what may arise, and it may not. We all seem a very nice set of people, and we're all very sweet, and we're all fine. But this may still arise for some of us, I'll let you know. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say that, you know, all of us have sacrificed time and expense and energy and preparation and, you know, separation from our families to be here. So let's really make the best of it. And when we arrive, I think all of us, when we arrive, expect to find some benefit from it. So why would we come if we weren't expecting some benefit, you know? And what I've written down here, you know, the usual culprits of expectation of what we will get from retreat. And there's nothing wrong with these things. They're just going to let you know because you may be disappointed. But these are the expectations. That we'll find peace. That we'll reduce stress in our lives. We'll find answers to the big questions, you know, the big metaphysical questions. Why am I alive? What's it all about? What's the point? We may hope to find an increased creativity. We may hope to find answers to life's problems. We may expect all those things. And in fact, what happen is the exact opposite. We may find we're less peaceful, we're more stressed. People start to irritate us. Things we get, you know, we have complaints. Somebody is doing something that seems not appropriate to Sesshin. Other people irritate us because they walk too slow in Kinhin, or, you know, the whole gamut of things that come up for us. And what we aspire to do is to kind of let those go. So whatever comes up for us in Sesshin, a good idea before we get upset about it in terms of other people's responsibilities is to really look at what is it in me that's causing me to be irritated or pissed off by this. You know? But first of all, have a look at home. And it may be that your irritation is completely valid, at which point you can come and have a word with me or the person concerned or the situation concerned. But first of all, have a look. You know, we're not going to have the situation here, but often the temperature of the zendo is a big issue for a lot of people, and how much air there is, and the list is long. But first of all, have a look at yourself. I've just listed here the 8 awarenesses that in traditional Buddhism that we try and cultivate. The 8 awarenesses we try and cultivate, and these offer a kind of guideline or guidelines of what we might. And I don't like the way they're written. These are the way they're written, but they kind of tell you what to do. Which I don't know about everybody else, but none of us like to be told what to do. But this one is. Be free of desires, know how to be satisfied, enjoy serenity and peace of mind, exert mindful effort. Don't forget right thought and attitude, which I can talk about later. Right thought or attitude is not how it seems. Practice samadhi. Well, we all have to achieve samadhi before we can practice it. So samadhi is a place of being kind of completely one in your life, at one with this authentic self. Cultivate wisdom. How do you cultivate wisdom? Anybody got any hints on how you cultivate wisdom? This is one of the awarenesses anyway. And avoid idle gossip and talk. How miserable is that? What greater pleasure is than an idle gossip and talk? But on Sesshin, we try and avoid idle gossip and talk. Okay. So, they're the kind of the backdrop. Is there any questions arise around that before I continue for anybody about Sesshin or anything I've said? I could be confrontational and say to you, can you tell me right now what your hopes, doubts and fears are? But I think it's probably too early in Sesshin and you're probably already thinking, I'm not going to front up to that in front of everyone. What are your hopes, doubts and fears? I suppose the interesting question for me always on these things, because this is what I do, and like several of us here, this is, Zen practice is a big part of our lives. And it's worth answering this question because it kind of conditions or allows you to be in the way you wish to be, or take out of Sesshin or practice what you want to be. So there's two ways to come into practice. One is that, and this is perfectly valid, is to treat it as a kind of band-aid to help you function better in life, which is a good place to start. And it's the starting point for most people, I think, when they come into practice. How can I get a bit more ease in my life, function better, be more creative, feel freer? Or are you interested in the really basic bottom line issue of what this life is about? Are you really interested in life and death? What does death mean? The big question of, for me, finally, probably the ultimate inspiration, if you like, a movement toward practice is to understand death. Because if we can come to terms with that, then in a way we're completely free. This fear of extinction, the fear of the small self's extinction, is for most folk present, even if not present at the front of the mind, is present at the back of the mind, and as we get older, it becomes more present. But certainly for younger people as well, it's a big question, And one of the attractions, if you like, these words are always difficult to choose, is that one of the qualities we carry with us in this authentic self, this place that is always there for us, is that in this tradition, and other ways have other ways of describing it, but in this tradition we say it's unborn and it's undying. So if you get in touch with that place, the question of birth and death don't arise. And in that greater context, my pragmatic experience, and it's not, as I say, everything is conditioned by, not everything is for everyone. Can we, including this peacock, can we embrace change? Can we embrace impermanence? Can we embrace all the fears and all the doubts that we carry with us? Can we embrace that, what I think of as the kind of, how would you describe it? It's a kind of unfocused, basic human anxiety that all of us, I think, at some point have known in our lives, that can arise at like 3 or 4 in the morning when we wake up and we feel unsettled and not quite sure, and we can't pin it down why we feel unsettled. I call that a kind of basic human anxiety that all of us experience at some time. Can we embrace our lives? Can we embrace change? Can we embrace impermanence? Can we embrace birth and death? And what happens if we can't, and for some of us it's a kind of really important issue. For some people it arises, so for some people it just simply doesn't arise. They go through their whole lives and this question doesn't come up. And great, I don't have any issue with that. Whatever gets you by is fine with me. Life's tough, it's difficult. So whatever gets you by is fine. But if these questions come up for you, then once the door is opened, my experience for most people is once that door is opened, once we get some insight, or once that part of ourselves starts knocking and wants some answers, it's really hard to shut the door again. It kicks up a fuss if you try and shut the door again. It doesn't, So what happens is the awakening or the need to practice arises often in our lives at that point as a crisis. So it's almost as though we're going to preempt the crisis. Crises will arise, but for a lot of folk, they only get in touch with this part of themselves when a crisis arises in their lives. And you work in a hospice, and I'm sure that everything I say is completely ringing, resonant for you. Yeah, for folk who are facing death. Yeah. And having said all that, the trick this week is to relax. Even though paradoxically it's hard to relax when you feel you've chosen this voluntary restriction, both in terms of location and your place on the map. When we let go of thinking that we're lacking in something, that's when practice starts, oddly enough. And for all of us who've practiced for quite a while, we also need to say categorically that the path is unending. And being on the path is no guarantee of an easy life. So the questions are, why would you even start, And each of us, and this is really important for me, for us all to remember in terms of our responsibility and relationship with other people, is that each of us has our own unique way of manifesting the Buddhist tradition or Buddhism or our life. Each of us has, so there are as many Buddhisms as there are Buddhists. And so let's be confident in that the way we are and the way we manifest who we are is absolutely fine. And I've just, for the old timers amongst us, I just want to encourage you, because what can happen when we practice a lot is that we get used to the practice and we get familiar with it and we get comfortable in it, and we can even reach the place that I call cat and dog zen. So cat and dog zen, everyone who's got a pet knows that a cat or a dog finds the most comfy place to sit. And once it's found it, it relaxes there, no challenge anymore. So don't let's get into cat and dog zen. We've been practicing quite a while. Don't letting the kettle come to near boiling and then decide to pour some cold water in by reducing our effort. Because the more steady, the more strongly, the more committed we are, it's incremental to the benefit of being in practice. And at the same time, I really appreciate everybody who's practiced for a long time that they're here. Really appreciate your continued practice. Is there any questions that have arisen from anything I've said? I do feel really free if anything's popping up or doubts or to jump in.
I just say something that's just come up in the context of what you're talking about, the essential fear of death.
Yeah.
Stick to the small self.
Yeah.
And just behind you is this amazing
I know.
scenario of all this
Yeah.
life going on. And I suppose that the greater mind is aware that there is, even for people that die, there is a greater life of which I am part, but I'm not the totality of it. But the small self really struggles with the idea that I'm not the centre of my universe.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
But pragmatically, everything is telling us
that we're not.
We're not.
I know. I mean, the great battle for the ego is that I'm unique, but everyone else is as well. What a disappointment for the ego. What a disappointment. I've just discovered I'm unique, and then I discovered everyone else is. But thanks, John, because that kind of brings me, thank you. If I was a DJ, I'd be very happy because you just give me a link into the next record. Because because some of us are new to practice, I thought I'd kind of, in the best way I could, simplify it about what into three basic aspects of practice. And the first thing that we all need to look at, and this is a three basic practice which are all interconnected with each other. But the first one is the Buddha's view. What is the Buddha's view of this practice? He was the origin of it, and why are we walking the same path, if you like? I mean, he, as you all know, the Buddha was. There are different types of Buddha, but the Buddha that we most relate to, I mean, there are kind of, mythical Buddhas in the tradition, but these act as symbols of aspirations of ways to be. But the real Buddha was just a regular human being like the rest of us, and in his time, he came to realization, and his realization was that most of us have a particular way of seeing the world. And most of us have certain roles and ambitions and things that we want to achieve, and particular ways we see the world, which we think are absolutely right. And what most of us aspire to, I think, most of our lives, is to find somewhere solid that we can stand on and depend on, so that we can at least feel secure in our lives. I think an awful lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis is to try to create a place where we feel safe and where we can stand. And intrinsically within that is the view that it won't move, it won't change. The Buddha saw, and in the context of his time, you have to remember that in the tradition he was part of, the Hindu tradition, believed in Atman. Which Atman is as I understand it, and there are others of you more involved in the Indian traditions, but Atman is a kind of solid, almost like a soul, like an entity that exists there, that if we get in touch with ourselves, is a permanent. I don't even know the words being or a permanent backdrop in our lives. And the Buddha was very radical in his time, because he said, no, it's not true. He gave a very uncomfortable message. He said, no, there isn't any real solid entity, which is ourselves. There's no real solid entity, which is the world, and which is external to ourselves. So there isn't an external solid entity out there, and there isn't a solid external entity here. There's no solid, unchangeable, dependable world, which is a great, initially, can be a really fearful thing to hear, which is why we've all grown used, we take it for granted that things exist. And we even, people will even go in front of a firing squad to insist that permanent things exist. But the hallmark of the Buddha's teaching is that there is no fixed place to stand. The three marks of this Buddhism is impermanence, no self, and the translation is often used as suffering, but I prefer the word of kind of discomfort, a kind of sense that life, we often feel that life is not quite complete. There's a little gap. There's a little gap always in how we are. So we're constantly adjusting and manoeuvring to try and fill the gap. And he said that that isn't the case. Which can sound a pretty miserable message when you first hear it. But, I mean, a simple analogy is, you know, it's like if you see a pond that's closed off, you know, a pond that doesn't have fresh water run into it, what happens? All that green stuff grows on it and everything dies. So, you know, if you think about it, even for 5 minutes, you know, if things were fixed and unchanging, it would be a pretty boring life, finally. And I think all of us at one level know that everything finally is impermanent. So then we come to the question, what was I talking about earlier on when I said there is a place in us where that we can rely on? What is that place? What is that place?
Just the fact that there is impermanence.
Pardon?
Impermanence.
Is that place?
It's the security.
Oh yeah. Impermanence is the security. Yeah. When you flip it, insecurity is the But we all do. We all do have really fixed views about the way things are, and all of us do. You know, and they're really hard to let go of. But it's a bit boring this because I've mentioned it before to folk, but it does really tickle me, this story of the. So apologies if you heard this story before. Those are people who knew, but could you imagine believing that you looked behind you for the future? Don't we all think that you look ahead for the future? You know, it's hard, isn't it, for the rational mind to think that you'd look behind for the future. But in fact, there are a whole culture in, I think, in the Amazon, and they all live by rivers, who when they talk about the future, they turn around to look. And that's because they live by rivers, and everything in the river that's going to come to pass is upriver. You look upriver. You look downriver for what's already gone. So you look down, you look forward for what's already gone, and you look back for what's going to happen. So they think in a completely different way to us. And yet, you know, for us that seems really strange. It's just an example of how fixed we can get in the way that we think the world operates. And it's cultural, it's personal, but I think we could all exercise more tolerance if we recognised that our views are our views. And, you know, they're not, they may be pragmatic from out of your experience, but they may not be somebody else's experience. So the Buddha had this view. And to realise the Buddha's view and understanding, we have to have insight into our true nature. And to get insight to our true nature, to embody his realisation, we practice our Zen. Because if we don't practice our Zen, however much we can kind of intellectually agree with him, it remains an intellectual knowing. And so what this practice is about is pragmatically and only about experience. It's about experiential experience. I'll make it double just to emphasize it. Experiential experience. So, what is it that we experience that allows us to understand his view? And I can tell you that. You know, I can tell you that. If you want me to. it's the view that we experience, or it's the way we experience ourselves or our lives when we loosen the grip of the ego or the small self. Now, we may all think that we're not clinging too tightly to that, and that's great if you're not, you know. But in Zen, traditionally in Zen, you know, let's say that our retreats, let's be really upfront about it, that our retreats are quite soft. We do a gentle retreat. You know, we're not hard line. We don't bring a Japanese kind of samurai view to bear. And I didn't even bring the Kiyosaki this time, which is the stick. But usually, and certainly for the first 5 years I was practicing with Genpo, one of the regular, and Tony will second this, one of the regular things that used to be shouted at us is, drop off body and mind! Drop off body and mind! And I used to think, I'd love to, but how do you do it, you know? I don't know how to drop off this body and mind. And what that encapsulates, saying drop off body and mind, is to drop off the self. That's what they're talking about. Drop off all your ideas of the self. Which is a really scary thing to do. It's a really scary thing to do, which is why Sesshin is tricky, and why, you know, all kinds of reasons will come up not to drop off. And I think most of us have been in the practice for a while will know that place where we've crawled into getting close to the idea that we may drop off body and mind, and it's felt like looking down a dark black abyss. And the first instinct is to crawl backwards and say, that's definitely not for me. And that's okay, you know, it's fine. We all have to crawl up to the edge and look down and back off several times. And, you know, and we, even within the Zen tradition, there are two schools of thought about this, which I wrestle with, because like Janet's Suffolk group and the folk here, Stonewater tends to be on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis, a lay practice. And a lay practice, as we're all constructed by our lives, by jobs, by work. We can't really give ourselves as completely as we might to the practice, so we do Sesshin. But within the Zen tradition, there are two schools of thought. One is the Southern school, which is the Rinzai school, which emphasizes koan practice and big breakthroughs and big openings. This is all simplified, and somebody may be listening to this if it's a talk and completely disagree with me. It's a very simplistic view. These things are much more sophisticated and graded than I'm saying. But there's the Rinzai view, which is the Southern Enlightenment view, and then there's the Soto view, which is the gradual Enlightenment view. So the Soto school is that you have the sudden big break opening, and then out of that you work from that to embodying that and bringing it back into the world, if you like. And the other view is the gradual view, where over a lot of years of practice we reduce the clinging of the ego. We reduce it to some degree anyway, so that we start to feel more spacious in our lives, more free, more able to interact with people without being incredibly irritated or pissed off by them, or situations in the world. All these things we can become a bit more tolerant, and that's why where it becomes very confusing in this tradition, because I think in most spiritual practices, and certainly in the Theravada one in Buddhism, we exercise a set of moral values. We have a set of ethical ways of being which we try and operate by and live by. And in Zen, although when we do Jukai or Tokudo, we do receive precepts. And these precepts are aspirational. They're not commandments. We haven't got to follow them. It's a suck and see job, you know. Do they work for me? Do they make my life easier, better? Finally, though, when I talked before about the eight. What were they called? The 8 awarenesses. We talked about right understanding and right view. In this practice, there isn't any right view or right understanding. Rightness, the right means to be open to what's appropriate to the situation and to you at that time. So it's a great responsibility. You know, Zen understanding has no absolute understanding. It depends on a moment-to-moment experience and decision. And we call it, I don't like the phrase, to be honest, because it's become a bit cliched, but there's we call it skillful means. Skillful means. So it means acting skillfully in a way which is appropriate to a situation. So it doesn't mean we impose a set of external moral values on ourselves, which we always bring out of the cupboard when a situation arises. We act appropriately. So that requires us to be really responsible, and a real sense of that what we're coming from is a spacious, open place, and that when we do respond, it isn't conditioned by our own. I mean, it's got to be to some degree, there has to be a flavour of that, but it's not conditioned necessarily by our own moral values. You know, it could be a case when, it's appropriate, you have to kill somebody, could happen. So, skillful means is really about acting in an unforced, spontaneous way that's appropriate to the situation. So there isn't a lot of comfort in this practice in terms of things that we can rely on and depend on. The only comfort we have is that, if it is a comfort, is that whatever decision we make is our responsibility, and the outcome of that decision is also our responsibility. And so, karma will become, cause and effect is a very direct feedback to our actions. Very direct feedback.
If there isn't ultimately a self,
yeah,
whose responsibility?
Which self are we talking about?
If the kind of the idea of a selflessness and if there isn't a self in there, who can be responsible for that? For the actions.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and then because there is no self, but absolutely as well, there is also this, embodied in this body that we carry around with, and our personality, our ego, is how we manifest in the world. We need one. So, when we talk about dropping off body and mind, we're not dropping off some poorly formed, wimpy ego. There's no point in dropping that off. It's got to be nicely formed and strong and able to be in the world. That's the one to drop off. So when we talk about no mind, or we talk about self and no self, there isn't any such thing really as self or no self. The ways that because we have to talk dualistically, that we talk about these things. In fact, there is only one life. There's only one coin. And Genpo had a great way of talking about that. We have no self on one side and the self on the other side, and it spins. It's the one coin. So there is, paradoxically, both somebody that suffers karmically or enjoys karmically, and there is also a no self for which there is no karmic payment. And what you put your finger on is what becomes a big issue, and you will see it in the spiritual life, not just of Zen, but most spiritual traditions, in which a person can start to live out of a no-self place, which they think is egoless, and from that place they feel that they're not causing any trouble. They are, and they do, as we all know. Spiritual teachers all over, in all traditions, can cause trouble. You know, and there's a fantastic koan in Zen in which a man, Hyakaju, he's called Hyakuju's fox, and he meets this fox in the grounds of his temple, and the fox says to him, I was asked, does a realized man suffer karmic effects? And I said no. And I've been reborn as a fox for 500 years for saying no. Hyakaju said, can you help me out? And Hyakaju said that an enlightened man should not ignore karma. He didn't say he suffered it, he said he should not ignore it. So, your question has hit at the very root of all spiritual practice in a way. So thank you. Yeah. So we've got view, the Buddha's view, how do we manifest and embody the Buddha's view through meditation, through Zazen, and then finally, which is really important to remember, is that this tradition is founded on the Bodhisattva ideal. Without the Bodhisattva ideal, for me this tradition would be uninteresting. And the Bodhisattva ideal is that we bring our understanding to bear in the world by exercising compassion. So, theoretically, a bodhisattva is someone who puts off their final enlightenment in order to stay around to help the rest of us. That's a kind of classic version of it. It's a kind of symbolic, mythical. Some people believe in its truth, and I don't know. But for each of us, this practice, for me anyway, is only valuable if what we embody and what we bring to bear in our lives manifests a compassion. Because otherwise, it finally becomes a selfish activity. So that's the action. So we've got view, the Buddha's view. We've got embodying the Buddha's view, which is meditation and all the other aspects of the practice. And then we've got the action, and the action is manifesting that with compassion in the world. And that's one of those programs on the radio, summary of of what the whole shenanigans are about. And if you'd like to ask, we've got 5 minutes. If anything's come up for you, or you want to share something about your own experience, that's fine as well.
I love what you said about the stream.
Oh yeah.
Behind to see the future. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah.
But I think it's similar to something in Uji, in Being Time.
Oh, is that right?
Dogen. I think Dogen says something like that.
He deals with that, does he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sort of makes sense because if you look at the moment, you can only understand the moment by thinking about what you're going to do next or what you've just done.
Yeah. And
you can only think about what you're going to do next on the basis of what you've just done. So,
yeah.
So there is, intuitively, it does, when you think about it, it does sort of make sense.
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, even being is questionable, isn't it?
Yeah.
According to Dogen, because as soon as you're being, it's past.
Yeah.
Everything's on the move.
That is a question I was thinking on the way here, because I was just thinking about people talking about being in the now, and I think I've had this thing for a very long time, that I can't be in the now, because every time I try and be in it,
it's gone.
It's just an idea in my head.
I agree. Yeah. And as well, as soon as we try to do something, we're not doing it, are we? It's like that. It's that knife edge of being present without thinking about being present, which is tricky. Yeah. Yeah. Are we done? Okay, sure. No, go.
I think one of the things that always makes me, one of the stories that always kind of brings me back to the kind of maybe the pleasure of the present, the possible pleasure of the present is that story about the guy who's being chased off a cliff by two tigers.
And he's hanging by one hand and sees a wonderful strawberry. Yeah.
It just always, because I just think, what's the meaning of that? And it's like, actually, strawberry's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. But wouldn't it be wonderful if you had that kind of, I think Jen and I were talking, and I said that, that people think of this practice as an ascetic practice, a hard practice, but in fact it's for hedonists, really. It is, it's all about really enjoying being alive. We take this voluntary restriction now because at the end of the week, when we're going home or walking around, life's going to feel nicer. It is, it happens, it's worth it. It's all about when we stop. It's easy. Yeah, write that down. Yeah. Yeah, in the middle period of the afternoon when your knees are in pain, you'll think, sod him.
I just had that strawberries there at the point of death.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
Like, Chris also, that's
yeah. And then you hope you think at the last moment, I wish I'd had more of them. Okay, thank you everyone, thank you. So what do we do now? I've forgotten. We do 4 hours? Yeah, okay.